Agatha, we get to learn more about Agatha Harkness. And there's still something to be said about that character in regards to kind of relating to Wanda. I don't know if you guys, like Matthew said, I rewatched the episode before we went live and kind of revisiting that moment when we see her kind of essentially saying, help me learn this powers, help me learn my magic. She says to her mother, help me. But she has this kind of villainous side. And we talked about Elizabeth Olsen, Paul Bettany, home runs every single episode. Catherine Hahn, if there is some type of award that could be given to her performance, supporting character, whatever you want to call it, give it to her, because she is so great in this scene. She's vulnerable, but she also has this villainous thing that she has going with the smirk on her face when she's talking to her coven, when she's talking to her mom. I don't know if you all noticed it, but there was, as we see the witches again going to the recap, it's we're in Salem, 1693. And we see that she's on the stake, very similar to the comics, but a little bit of MCU twist on it. As they're trying to take Agatha out, she's absorbing their powers. And also there's like an orange aura around them trying to absorb her powers, which reminded me a lot of that book that we saw last week. I don't know if there is some type of connections to, again, who taught Agatha about using the dark magic, who pushed her towards that direction. I know the Mephisto and all that stuff is out there, but really, who is the one that kind of taught her that? So just kicking it to you first, Amanda, that opening sequence, the origins of sorts from Agatha, very dark, to mind you. We saw some witches get their souls sucked out of them. What was your thoughts about this opening scene here?
I loved it. I love her. She has made the series what it is, to be perfectly honest. Without Catherine Hahn, I do think that she's one of the best villains. I thought she was fantastic. And I love knowing where they come from and why, what makes them tick, what got them to where they are. So I thought that was a great opening, a very strong opening for her. And I'm so excited to see what else she's going to do in the MCU, because you can't just have her in this. You can't. It's impossible.
Hope, they don't kill her next week. I so hope they don't do that.
I swear to God, if they do.
Amanda, I'm sorry, but I think she's going to get obliterated.
No. I'll
Scarlet Witch is coming, my friends.
Oh my God, I'll literally go off. I really will. But I love her so much. But yeah, that was a great opening. Really strong.
Chris, man, tossing it to you. We talked a little bit about it off screen before we went live. The dark nature of this opening sequence and how Marvel's embracing the supernatural side of the MCU. Blade, Moon Knight, Doctor Strange, and Into the Multiverse. Just kind of your thoughts on that opening sequence. And did you feel from Catherine Hahn, was she just being deceptive, or was she calling for help from her mother and her coven?
Yeah, it was a lot to kick off. And as soon as the episode started, I thought right away, I was like, damn, we just talked about this last week, like a flashback episode. I was like, damn, like a point for us. But I thought this scene was cool. I got the vibe that she was kind of like Loki-ish. Like, you just can't really trust her because she was giving like these weird smirks. So I was like, man, I don't know. Because at first I was like, she's like wants to her mom. And then she was like, give that smirk. And I was like, oh, damn, I can't trust her. I think my only criticism of the whole scene, it didn't feel like that old. Like, it didn't feel like it was in 1693. They didn't change too much of like how they shot it, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So it didn't feel that old, but like I was still like, okay, cool. I love this episode as a whole, but I think the opening was probably like my least favorite part of it. But it was, the whole episode was dope.
Another thing I only noticed on a second watch was they actually de-aged Catherine Hahn.
I was going to bring that up. I didn't want to, she's a beautiful woman, but I didn't want to, I didn't know if they did that. But thank you. I'm glad I'm not the only one that noticed that.
But they didn't Luke Skywalker it in The Mandalorian. It was very subtle, very subtle.
And then, she looks older at the end of the episode too, which kind of speaks to her being, kind of ancient and all that. But just kicking it to you, Paul, in regards to just your thoughts on the opening sequence, were there things you kind of pulled out? And in regards to, is there something to be said about her? Who pushed her going towards practicing this dark magic?
Okay, so the scene itself pulls from Agatha's death in the comics, which is when she was burned on a pyre by the Salem 7. And it's sort of something similar. The Salem 7 were basically witches. And I when it first started off, I thought, she's going to be in as part of the Salem witch trials, but they kind of tied it in more with her death. But instead of her getting killed, it kind of backfired for them, and she ended up taking over them. Now, as for the magic, throughout the show, we've kind of seen how certain colors are associated with certain magics. So orange is always the more standard. You're in control of everything. and that's why Doctor Strange, the Ancient One, whenever they cast a spell, it's always orange.
Right.
Red is sort of your chaos magic, which is what Wanda does, and it's chaos basically. So it's you can't really control. Purple is it's the dark dimension because Dormammu, that's what he uses. And if you look in Doctor Strange, Caecilius, his eyes are purple when when he starts becoming darker. So she's clearly pulling from the dark dimension, which would have to have her in contact with someone behind the scenes. Now, so it's either Dormammu, Mephisto. Don't tell anyone to say Mephisto. Nightmare potentially. Chthon. I always pronounce that wrong because
I think it's Chthon.
Chthon. He wrote the Darkhold as well, which is the book that she potentially has. So that kind of ties in with that. And in the comics, he actually appeared as Quicksilver at one point. He possessed Quicksilver. So we're getting sort of a possession of Quicksilver. He was also the person that gave Wanda her powers when she was younger. And in this episode, we learn that she had powers before, the Mind Stone, all the Hydra stuff. So potentially, it's him. But I know every week that I'm like, I'm telling you, it's actually this guy. Ignore the last prediction. So I think it's him.
That would be, again, we've gotten some introductions to some characters in this show, whether it be obviously Monica Rambeau becoming Spectrum, Scarlet Witch now, and obviously Agatha Harkness. So there is, I think, still a mysterious character that we'll talk a little bit about later in regards to potentially behind the scenes. But tossing it to you, Matthew, regarding your thoughts on this opening sequence, kind of your thoughts on a little bit of what Paul was saying regarding pulling the strings behind the scenes, who kind of influenced Agatha to kind of embrace this darker side, and just your general take on this opening sequence of her origins of sorts.
So I loved it, and I loved how they opened up the episode with Agatha, because the last episode ended with like the Agatha reveal, and because we haven't really gotten her being her own character across the entire show, it was really refreshing to see them open it up with just her being full Agatha Harkness. There's a ton of speculation of whether or not she was like truly like telling the truth, but we've seen Agnes putting up this act the whole show. I just cannot trust her. You gotta take her out while you can. So I thought she was just evil the whole way through. And I think Chthon, again, I'm sure we all speculate like Mephisto or Nightmare at first, but now it seems like Chthon is more of a likely pick to be someone that's pulling the strings behind the scenes because of his connections to the Darkhold, the Dark Dimension, to Wanda. So I think they're gonna go in the Chthon direction. But again, this is a theory that's going to get obliterated at the beginning of next episode. I know it already. So
It is so interesting about these different villains too, because again, with one episode left, I don't want to say they can't do it, but it would be kind of interesting to see them introduce this big bad in one episode. I don't know if they would be saving it for a Spider-Man, No Way Home, or saving it for a Doctor Strange. It might be like a post-credit scene in regards to this, villain coming up behind the scenes, or they've been manipulating the situation the whole time. So it will be interesting to see if we do get a big bad that's essentially behind Agatha, because again, like Paul was kind of alluding to with the comics, traditionally speaking, she's a mentor of Wanda. And you can even see Agatha not necessarily giving her tips, but she's kind of telling her certain things as we transition to the next scene. And we see her, with Wanda being in her possession, and she's talking about the manipulation of magic, and she doesn't know the foundations of magic. And she's giving her these little hints, these little tidbits. Again, it's a villainous way, and Catherine Hahn is just hamming it up in this scene, but she's somewhat giving her little tidbits of how to use her powers as